All right, let's dive into HAARP. I know you're out there and you're interested in this whole mysterious facility up in Alaska, and I bet you've heard some pretty wild theories about it. So let's cut through all the noise. Yeah. What is HAARP really all about?
Well, you're right. There's so much speculation about HARP, and it's kind of fascinating, right? I mean, you've got this cutting edge science happening in such a remote place. It's bound to get people's imaginations going.
Okay, so before we go down that rabbit hole of conspiracy theories, let's just, start with the basics. What is HAARP and what's it actually used for?
So HARP stands for the High Frequency Active Auroral Research Program. It's basically a research facility located in Gakona, Alaska. And the main thing about it, it has this very powerful antenna array. Its purpose is to study the ionosphere, which is this electrically charged layer of the Earth's upper atmosphere.
Okay, so they study the ionosphere. Got it. But how do they do that? What makes HAARP so unique?
HAARP uses these high-frequency radio waves, and they use these to heat and excite certain small areas of the ionosphere. This then creates these controlled disturbances, almost like, tiny localized auroras. So then scientists can actually study how these disturbances affect things like, radio wave propagation or even like the actual composition of the ionosphere itself.
Wow, that's fascinating. So they create these small disturbances to learn about the big picture of how this ionosphere works. But I know there's more to it than that, right? I mean, there are people out there who believe that HAARP can do some pretty unbelievable things, like they think it can even control the weather.
Yeah, the weather control theory, that's definitely one of the most prevalent ones. Some people really believe that a HAARP can, trigger earthquakes, hurricanes, even manipulate the jet stream. I get why it's a captivating idea, but the scientific consensus is, sorry to say, that's just not possible.
Why is that? I mean, if HAARP can create disturbances in the ionosphere, wouldn't that have at least some impact on the weather patterns?
Sure, HAARP can make those controlled disturbances, but the energy levels they're working with, they're just too small to really influence these massive complex systems that actually drive our weather. Imagine trying to steer a hurricane with a handheld fan.
Yeah.
The scales are just, well, they're not comparable at all.
Right, that makes sense. So we can put that weather control theory to bed, but what about mind control? I've heard that one too, that HAARP is some kind of mind control machine. And some of these claims, they're pretty wild.
Yeah, mind control, another very popular one. This theory suggests that HAARP is using these directed energy beams, or maybe even some kind of subliminal messaging, to actually manipulate our thoughts and emotions.
I have to say, even I find that one a little hard to believe. It sounds like something right out of a science fiction movie.
You're right to be skeptical. There's simply no scientific basis for this idea. Our current understanding of neuroscience just doesn't support that claim. And there's just no credible evidence out there to suggest that this is even remotely possible.
Okay, so we've debunked weather control and mind control. What other theories are floating around out there, and is there any truth to them at all?
Well, there's another theory about HAARP's connection to, these secret military projects. Some people believe the facility is being used for things like super dense radar systems, electromagnetic pulse weapons, even communicating with extraterrestrials.
Now that's a headline I'd read. Secret military agendas, extraterrestrial communication. It does sound like something straight out of a spy movie. But is there any evidence to support those claims?
It is true that the military was involved in the early funding of HAARP. That's true. However, the facility is now run by the University of Alaska Fairbanks. And while, there might be some classified research going on, there's really no solid evidence to back up these wilder claims about secret weapons or, talking to aliens.
Okay, so we've got this powerful facility. It's in a super remote location with this, history shrouded in secrecy. I mean, it's no wonder that HAARP has become like this breeding ground for conspiracy theories.
Exactly. When you have this lack of transparency, right? And then you combine that with the facility's unique capabilities and then the public's natural fascination with the unknown, well, it's just a perfect recipe for speculation to run wild.
It's almost like, people see this powerful technology and they just project their fears and anxieties onto it, like filling in the blanks with whatever they can imagine.
That's a great way to put it. But the thing is, these theories often come from a lack of understanding about the science involved.
Which is exactly why we're here today. We're trying to get to the bottom of things, delve into the actual science behind HAARP. We're here to separate fact from fiction.
Exactly. And, that actually leads us to some really fascinating research that's being done at HAARP. For instance, did you know they've used HAARP to study this thing called artificial air glow?
Artificial air glow? That sounds kind of intriguing. I have to admit, I'm not familiar with that one. What is it exactly, and why is it important?
Artificial air glow, it's like this faint luminescence that you see in the night sky. And scientists can actually create it by using HAARP to, excite the ionosphere. It's almost like a controlled version of the aurora borealis.
Okay, so they're creating mini auroras. Now that's something I can visualize, but what can scientists actually learn from studying this artificial air glow?
So by observing how that artificial air glow forms and how it changes over time, scientists can actually get these incredible insights into the composition of the upper atmosphere. They can even analyze the different colors and patterns of the light to figure out what gases and particles are present at different altitudes.
So it's kind of like using this giant high-tech flashlight to uncover the secrets of the upper atmosphere. I like that. What else have they discovered with this flashlight?
Well, another big area of research involves how radio waves actually propagate. You see, the ionosphere, it plays this really crucial role in how radio waves travel all around the globe. And HAARP allows these scientists to study this process, but in a very controlled environment.
Yeah, like the Earth's own satellite dish, just bouncing those signals back to us. How does HAARP actually factor into all that?
Remember those controlled disturbances we talked about earlier? Well, scientists can use HAARP to create very specific types of disturbances in the ionosphere, and then just observe how they affect how radio waves travel. And this kind of research, it has a lot of implications. It could help us improve radio communications or even help us develop these new types of radar systems.
That's amazing. It really sounds like HAARP, despite all of the, conspiracy theories out there, is involved in some really groundbreaking research.
Oh, absolutely. And this research, it could have such a huge impact on how we understand the space environment and, our ability to communicate and navigate within it.
This is already so much more interesting than all that talk about HAARP controlling the weather or our minds.
I completely agree. The real science behind HAARP, it's so much more captivating than anything anyone could make up. And we still got so much more to discover.
Well, this is a great start. We've debunked some of those big myths surrounding HAARP, and we're starting to dig into the real science behind it.
And this is only the beginning. There's a whole world of research and discovery ahead of us. Let's continue our deep dive into HAARP.
I'm starting to see why people are so drawn to HAARP. It's like this mix of scientific mystery and the potential for these huge discoveries, but also, maybe a little bit of anxiety about what we don't know yet.
Yeah, for sure. And, speaking of those discoveries, that's a perfect transition into some of the more specific research they're doing at HAARP. One area that really gets me excited has to do with radio waves and how they can travel these incredible distances.
So it's more than just bouncing those radio waves off the ionosphere for communication, right? What's so different about how they study radio waves at HAARP?
Okay, so get this. HAARP can generate these very low frequency, VLF, and extremely low frequency, ELF, radio waves. Now, these waves are special because they can penetrate deep into the ocean, something that's really hard to do with normal radio communication.
Hold on, are you saying they can, talk to submarines? Like submarines that are way down there, hundreds of feet below the surface?
That's the idea. The research is still in progress, but the potential for HAARP to talk to those submarines is there.
Yeah.
It would be a total game changer for, naval operations and even, for scientific exploration of the deep ocean.
Wow, I had no clue. That's so much cooler than some of those conspiracy theories, right? So what other applications are there for this kind of research?
Well, if we're talking about things that sound like they're from science fiction, we can't forget about space weather. You know how solar flares and other events can disrupt satellites and communication systems and even power grids here on Earth?
Yeah, I've heard about those. Sounds pretty scary, actually. What does HAARP have to do with all that?
HAARP, because it can create those controlled disturbances in the ionosphere, it makes it a really valuable tool for studying how space weather impacts us here on Earth. By watching how the ionosphere reacts, scientists can actually learn a lot about predicting and even preventing the effects of those space weather events.
Oh, so it's kind of like an early warning system, but for space storms.
You could say that. I mean, the more we understand about that relationship between the sun and our atmosphere, the better prepared we'll be to protect our technology, right? And our infrastructure from those potentially, dangerous events.
This all sounds like it has some pretty serious real-world implications. Are there any other applications of HAARP that we haven't even touched on yet?
Absolutely there are. We've only just scratched the surface. There are tons of other areas of research going on at HAARP, like some scientists are actually using it to study the aurora borealis, trying to understand how those incredible light shows happen.
Wait, are you serious? They can make auroras, like artificial ones. That's unbelievable.
Well, not exactly those huge, full-blown auroras that you see naturally, but, they create very similar effects in the ionosphere, and that lets them study those complex processes that create them.
Still pretty cool. What else are they looking at?
Another really fascinating area of research is about using HAARP to create these temporary lenses in the ionosphere. Like, imagine focusing radio waves in the same way you would focus light with, like a magnifying glass. That's basically what they're doing. And it could lead to these big improvements in how we do long-range communication and even with our radar systems.
Okay, so we've got potential applications for talking to submarines, space weather prediction, even making our radio signals better. It sounds like the possibilities are pretty much endless.
You got it. And that's precisely why HAARP is so exciting. It's a tool for exploring the things we don't know, and every time we make a new discovery, it opens up even more possibilities for the future.
It's like we're just starting to understand what HAARP is capable of, and the reality of this facility is way more interesting than all those conspiracy theories floating around.
I couldn't agree more. The real story of HAARP, it's all about scientific curiosity and exploration and the search for knowledge, things that could actually benefit all of us.
It reminds us that sometimes the truth is stranger than fiction, right? And it's definitely more interesting.
Exactly. And it shows how important it is to approach things we don't know with, a bit of healthy skepticism, but also with a sense of wonder and a real willingness to learn.
Wow. It's amazing how much we've learned about HAARP already. I mean, we started with these, kind of crazy conspiracy theories, and now we're talking about all this incredible research, stuff that could actually change our lives in so many ways.
It really shows you the power of actually doing the research, right? Like really looking into things. And it speaks to, I think, just our natural curiosity about the world.
Yeah, totally. I mean, we're drawn to these mysteries, and sometimes when we don't have all the answers, well, our minds just sort of fill in the blanks. But like we've seen with HAARP, the reality is often way more fascinating than anything we could make up.
This deep dive, it's been a great example of how understanding the science can help us sort through all that, all the noise and all the myths, get to the truth.
Absolutely. And it makes me think, like, in a world where information spreads so fast, how can we be smarter about what we choose to believe? How do we get better at thinking critically so we can handle all this information coming at us all the time?
That's such a huge question, especially these days, right? I mean, we're just bombarded with all this information from every direction. It's easy to get caught up in those, big headlines or things that sound really dramatic. But if we can improve those critical thinking skills, we can all become, more informed, more responsible about what we believe.
Okay, so where do we even start? What are some actual things we can do to get better at critical thinking?
Well, one of the first things is just to, be really honest with yourself about your own biases. I mean, we all have these ideas and beliefs that shape how we see the world, right? Recognizing our own biases, that's like the first step in being able to really look at information objectively.
Yeah, that makes sense. If we're not aware of our own biases, then it's easy to just grab onto anything that agrees with what we already think, even if it's not totally true.
Exactly. We have to be open to challenging our own assumptions and, just being open to different ways of looking at things.
And I guess that means, going out and finding information from lots of different sources, not just the ones that we already agree with.
Definitely. It's all about getting the full picture. Don't just, stick to one news channel or website. Look around. Explore different sources. Read articles from places that have a good reputation for accuracy. Listen to what experts have to say, even if they have different opinions.
So it's about actively engaging with the information, not just sitting back and letting it wash over you, right?
Yes. And that brings up another big tip. Always pay attention to the source. Like, who is giving you this information and what are their reasons for doing it? Do they have an agenda? Are they biased in a certain direction? Really understanding the source, it helps you figure out how trustworthy the information is.
Right. Like maybe a headline sounds super shocking or whatever, but if it's coming from a source that's known for exaggerating or just, making stuff up, then you have to be careful. You can't just take it at face value.
Absolutely. And, similar to that, always look for evidence. Like, is there anything that actually supports what they're saying? Don't just believe something because someone says it, even if they seem super convincing. Ask yourself, what's the proof? Like, are there studies, data, reports from people who are trustworthy? Evidence is like the building block of making good judgments.
So if there's no proof, no real evidence, it's probably a good idea to be a little skeptical. And I guess that goes for those, crazy headlines we see and all those wild conspiracy theories we were talking about earlier.
You got it. A healthy dose of skepticism, it's so important for thinking critically. But it's not about being, negative or cynical. It's about asking questions, asking for proof, and being okay with changing your mind if someone shows you some good evidence.
It seems like critical thinking, it's something you have to keep practicing. Like it's a skill you develop over time, not something you just figure out once and you're done.
You're exactly right. It's something you do your whole life. It's about constantly learning and questioning and evaluating. The more we do it, the better we'll get at, making sense of the world, all this complicated stuff.
Well said. So as we wrap up our deep dive on HAARP, let's remember that it's bigger than just this one facility in Alaska. It's about how we approach all information. It's about asking questions, thinking for ourselves, and really trying to find the truth.
For sure. HAARP, it's a great example of how the world is full of these amazing things and these mysteries, but also how what we think we know, it's always changing. It's up to each of us to really get involved in that, to think critically, to be curious.
And sometimes that means, letting go of what we think we know and being open to the possibility that things might be even cooler, more interesting than we ever thought.
Thanks for being here with us today.
We hope you enjoyed exploring the world of HAARP. Keep thinking critically out there.